Wobbles the clown would occasionally show up uninvited and unexpectedly at our campus worship service. And she would participate as a member of the congregation and often would stick around afterwards and visit with the students. And they enjoyed it. Some of the folks were put off by her surprise visits, and I always looked forward to them. In fact, a few years later, when I was serving as a parish pastor, I decided to try my hand at being a clown. Mainly to see how I would be accepted in the church. My sister made me a clown suit. I bought a wig and a red sponge nose. And a lady in the congregation who did makeup professionally made me up as a clown, and I was set to go. I decided to attend a district meeting of pastors and Christian educators in a church about 50 miles from home. So I drove up, got to the church, signed in at the registration table. I had decided that because I have a fairly distinct drawl, and also because I would know a good many of the people who would be there and did not want to be recognized, I decided that I'd speak as little as possible. So I signed in, just signed in Sosaku, went immediately to a small group meeting, was well accepted. People were a little surprised, but everything went okay. And then at the break, I was browsing through some resource materials when I was aware of a presence behind me. You know how that feeling happens sometimes. And I looked around, and I'm looking at two men dressed in black suits, shirt and tie, very formal, and I recognized them as being the pastor and the associate pastor. I recognized them. They obviously did not recognize me. And the associate pastor said, "Who are you?" Just real demanding. And I said, I was a little jarred by it, but I said, I am Sosaku. And the pastor said, "Who are you really? If you don't tell us who you really are, you're going to have to leave." Well, I was getting a little more defensive, and at that point I said, "Sosaku will not stay where he is not welcome." And I was escorted out, flanked by the pastor and the associate pastor, who waited at the front door until they saw me get in the car and drive off. I was angry. This was not the response that I had anticipated. And so I drove around Fort Wayne for a while, more to cool off than anything else before I headed home, and I spotted this tavern that served lunch, and so I parked and went in, climbed up on the stool, and waited until someone took my order. I had just about forgotten that I had the clown suit on at that point, but the waiter came over, and the bartender, and said, "Can I take your order?" And when he saw me, he said, "Well, what do we have here? A real clown." And the man who had been sitting on the stool next to me, who had his back turned and had not noticed me at all, at that point turned around, and I'm just a foot and a half away from the widest, open, toothless grin I think I have ever seen in my life. And down at the end of the bar, this big brute of a guy said, "What's going on down there?" And the bartender said, "We got us a real clown down here." And he said, I want to see this. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, this is maybe not what I wanted to happen. But he came down, he stuck out his hand and said, I've always wanted to meet a real clown. Hell, I've always wanted to be a clown. Let me buy you a beer. And so I finished my lunch, and he and I shot a game of pool. And I got in the car and headed home. In a much better mood, I must admit, than when I first got there. I was in a meeting a month or so later with the pastor of the church who had escorted me out. He didn't recognize me, of course, as a clown, and I never told him the story, never reminded him. But to this day, every time I recall what happened that day in Fort Wayne, I can't help but contrast the reception I got at the church by the professional holy men and the one I got at the bar. I don't know. It's a good story, don't you think? And it really happened.